I didn't think I'd be writing this, but here I am, keyboard shaking slightly, wine untouched next to me, Spotify on low volume just to stop the silence from crawling up my back. Let's rewind a bit. My name is Erin, and at the time all of this started, I was 34 years old and working as a freelance financial consultant in Austin. I wasn't rich, but I was doing well. I had a couple of long-term clients, my apartment had great lighting, and my credit score was beautiful, the kind you take screenshots of just to admire when life feels chaotic. I was also in a relationship. For years, living together for 2.5. His name? Mark. Mark was charming. You know the type. The guy who always knew which wine to pick at dinner, the one who could make strangers laugh within 30 seconds. My friends liked him. My parents adored him. Even my dog, Luna, who usually growled at men, would curl up next to him on the couch like she'd found her soulmate. But behind closed doors, Mark was different. He wasn't abusive. He wasn't cruel. He was just absent, detached, emotionally aloof. There were red flags, yes. Small ones. Like how he never wanted to talk about bills, or how he'd always forget to Venmo me his share of rent on time. Or how, when I'd bring up long-term plans, marriage, a house, maybe a family, he'd laugh it off with, "Let's just enjoy the now, babe." And I tried. God, I tried to be understanding. I told myself he was just bad with money, maybe never taught how to budget. I even offered to help. You'd think a financial consultant would be better at spotting red flags, but no, love really does blind you. It started slowly. $100 here, 200 there. Babe, my check hasn't cleared yet, or they messed up my payroll again, can you cover dinner? Stuff like that. I told myself it was temporary. Until it wasn't. The breaking point, or at least what should have been, came last summer. I got a call from my bank one morning. A fraud alert. Someone had tried to withdraw $1,400 from my personal savings account, my emergency fund. I hadn't touched it in months. At first, I panicked, changed all my passwords, froze my credit. But something gnawed at me. That withdrawal attempt came from a location close to our apartment, too close. I checked the IP logs from my online banking. It was our Wi-Fi. Mark was in the shower when I found out. I sat there on the bed, staring at my laptop, waiting for the world to start spinning. But it didn't. I confronted him when he stepped out. He didn't deny it. Didn't even look that guilty. Just said something like, "I was going to put it back before you noticed." My throat closed up. I remember I just sat there, blinking. He tried to spin it, said he needed the money to hold a hotel reservation for a friend's bachelor party. Claimed he didn't want to bother me with it. Said it was just for a night or two. I should have kicked him out right then. But I didn't. Instead, like a complete idiot, I asked, "Why didn't you just talk to me?" And you know what he said? "Because every time I talk to you about money, you act like my mom." That night, I slept on the couch. Luna followed me, curled up against my legs like she knew something had shifted. And still I didn't leave. Why? Because breaking up isn't always a big, explosive moment. Sometimes it's slow, 1,000 little cuts that don't bleed until you stand up one day and realize you're covered in scars. Over the next month, I pulled away. Quietly. I started separating our finances, changed my passwords, transferred money into a private account, removed him from my credit card. He noticed, of course. He said I was being dramatic. Accused me of treating him like a criminal. The irony was overwhelming. But here's where the story turns. One afternoon, I was at a client meeting when I got a message from my best friend, Lauren. It was a screenshot. Mark. At a rooftop bar. With another woman. Not just any woman, some wannabe influencer, all filtered selfies and fake deep captions. The kind who ends every post with "sparkles, sparkles, bless sparkles, sparkles." The caption? "Can't believe he surprised me with this view to hearts #day night." And there, clear as day in the background, Mark. Holding her hand. Wearing the jacket I'd bought him for his birthday. I felt nothing. Just cold. Later that night, I went through our shared credit card statements. Rooftop bar, $137. Flowers, $62. Uber ride to Sapphire Suites, $19. And it all came from my card. The one I hadn't yet removed him from. He wasn't just cheating. He was using my money to do it. That's when something in me snapped. Not in a rage kind of way. Not in a crying on the floor kind of way either. It was quiet. Focused. Like a switch flipped, and I saw everything for what it really was. I didn't tell him I knew. Not yet. Instead, I spent the next 2 weeks preparing. Gathering receipts. Screenshots. Bank statements. I made copies of everything. Digital and printed. I backed up every file to 2 drives, one at home, one at my sister's. And then, I waited. Waited for the right moment. It came sooner than I expected. Mark had just gotten a big idea, a luxury dog accessory startup, I know, and needed help launching it. He didn't ask me directly. He assumed I'd be investing. Said something like, with your connections and my vision, this thing could blow up. I smiled. I said I was in. But on one condition. My name would be on everything. Website domain, business account, EIN filing, all under me. He didn't even blink. Said it was just paperwork. That we were a team. What he didn't know is that I'd already spoken to a lawyer. I created a separate entity, a shell company in my name. Let him do all the creative work. Let him max out his own credit cards buying sample collars and custom-stitched leashes. Let him brag to his friends that Erin and I are building an empire. And all the while I watched. Waited. Let him dig his own grave. Because that money? The pre-orders? The client leads? They were legally mine. Mark was never one for details. He liked the big picture, the flashy pitch, the part where people clapped and called him visionary. But he never liked sitting down to actually do the work, which is why the launch of our little luxury pet brand was entirely run by me. Or rather, by me pretending I still gave a damn. He talked. I built. He posted photos of mock-ups on Instagram. I bought the domain, the hosting plan, set up the Shopify store, and connected it to the Stripe account, which, of course, was registered under my name and routed to a business bank account he never had access to. He was too busy fantasizing about being on Shark Tank to notice. When I handed him a pile of documents to sign, NDAs, vendor agreements, manufacturing orders, he signed them without reading. Said something like, "That's why I have you, babe." That used to sound sweet. Now it just made my skin crawl. I let him choose the name for the company. He landed on something ridiculous. Posh. Like posh, but for pets. I smiled and told him it was brilliant. Meanwhile, I made sure Posh LLC was owned entirely by my shell company. It took him 3 days to spend $8,000 on samples, logos, a custom-built photo shoot with rented golden retrievers, and a PR consultant he found on Twitter. The guy didn't even have a website, just a bunch of hashtags and a pitch deck that looked like it was made in Canva by a teenager. But Mark loved him. Said he understood the brand. I didn't care. I wasn't investing my money anymore. I let Mark open a line of credit in his name to fund the launch. He didn't ask me to co-sign. That was the one smart thing he did, or maybe he thought he didn't need me now that we were building something huge. Meanwhile, I was quietly documenting everything. The business email went through a domain I controlled. The store backend had dual admin access, him and me, but only I could make actual changes. He never noticed. He was too busy chasing brand partnerships and posting filtered photos of our dog Luna in rhinestone collars. And all the while, he was still sneaking around with that girl. I knew because Lauren kept sending me screenshots. Stories, TikToks, blurry mirror selfies. One even showed them on a weekend getaway captioned, "He treats me like a queen to hearts." I cross-checked the date with our credit card statement and saw the hotel charge. He didn't even bother to hide it anymore. But I stayed quiet. I smiled. I helped him build his little dream. And when he talked about the future, about moving to LA, about hiring a real team, about pitching to investors, I nodded and said, "That sounds amazing." Because I knew exactly how this story would end. I just had to time it right. The business took off faster than either of us expected. Mostly because I was handling everything: orders, logistics, emails, customer service. I built an automated workflow that looked like magic. Customers were posting about us, tagging us, calling us the next big thing in pet fashion. Mark was glowing. He booked a podcast interview with some influencer who called him a startup darling. He sent screenshots to his friends. I heard him on the phone with his dad, telling him that this time, it's real. He even called me his co-founder on LinkedIn. Co-founder. That one made me laugh. We hit $50,000 in sales in less than 3 weeks. And I didn't give him a dime. Because all of it, every single penny, was going into the business account I controlled. And I made sure to pay every supplier on time, fulfill every order with care, and reply to every email as professionally as possible. I wanted this company to be spotless. I wasn't burning it down. I was taking it with me. About a month after launch, Mark brought up investors. Said we needed to scale, that we could probably land a 6-figure seed round if we pitched right. I said we should wait. He didn't like that. Said I was thinking small, afraid of success. Called me controlling for not letting him handle the pitch deck. So I let him handle it. He scheduled 3 Zoom meetings with potential angel investors. Sent them a deck filled with buzzwords and pixelated screenshots. Promised 10x returns. And when they asked about ownership structure, he told them we were 50/50ths. That was when things got interesting. One of the investors, a woman named Mira, who had built 2 tech startups herself, emailed me directly. Said she had some concerns and wanted clarity on how equity was structured. I was polite. I explained that Posh LLC was wholly owned by my company, that I held 100% equity, and that Mark was listed as a contractor. I attached documentation. She never replied. But I saw her name drop off the Zoom schedule the next day. Mark was furious. Said I'd sabotage the pitch. I calmly showed him the paperwork he'd signed. The EIN registration. The articles of organization. The contracts. I even pulled up the dashboard that showed he was a non-equity employee. His face turned gray. "What the hell is this?" he asked, voice shaking. "This," I said, "is a business I built. You just helped decorate it." He screamed. Accused me of lying, manipulating, backstabbing. I didn't flinch. "You used my money to cheat on me," I said. "Now you know how it feels to be cut out of something you thought was yours." He packed a bag that night. Tried to slam the door, but Luna barked so loud he flinched and stormed out quietly instead. I changed the locks the next morning. He tried to call, text, email, apologized, begged, threatened, apologized again. I didn't reply. Instead, I issued a formal cease and desist letter through my lawyer. It outlined that Mark was never an employee of the LLC, that he had no ownership or claim to the brand, and that any attempts to misrepresent himself as affiliated with Posh would result in legal action. He went quiet after that, for about 2 weeks. Then the blog posts started. Anonymous Medium articles accusing me of stealing his startup. Reddit threads titled, "She Stole My Company." Fake Twitter accounts tagging Posh in hateful replies. I documented everything. My lawyer filed a defamation notice. We got 2 of the blog posts taken down and 3 Twitter accounts suspended. The real blow came when his personal credit card statements caught up with him. Between the samples, the hotel stays with his new girl, the PR consultant, and the endless brunches he kept posting online, he'd racked up nearly $25,000 in debt, all in his name. The best part? He'd told everyone, including his parents, that I was funding the brand. So when he moved back home, broke, disgraced, and unemployed, he had to explain to his conservative dad how he blew a quarter of a year's salary on dog collars and Instagram models. Posh kept growing. I hired 2 customer service reps, then a logistics coordinator, then a marketing lead. Sales doubled, then tripled. I never mentioned Mark publicly. Never posted about him. Never addressed the drama. I just kept building. And eventually, people stopped asking about him. They only saw me, the founder, the face of the brand, the woman who built something real. And him? He became a cautionary tale. A guy who thought charm was enough. Who tried to use someone else's money, time, and love to build his own empire. But in the end, all he built was his own collapse. And I watched it all calmly, quietly, unapologetically, from the comfort of the company I now owned outright. To this day, I still get emails from other women thanking me for telling this story, for showing that revenge doesn't always have to be loud or messy. Sometimes, the best revenge is thriving while they watch everything fall apart. And oh, did it fall apart? I'll admit something I haven't said out loud before. I didn't expect it to feel so quiet. When Mark finally disappeared from my life, no more texts, no more late-night voicemails, no more pathetic anonymous posts about how she ruined me, I thought I'd feel triumphant. Like standing on top of some metaphorical mountain, fists raised, shouting into the wind. But instead, it just felt still. There were no fireworks. No finish line. Just silence. Peaceful, but heavy. My friends kept asking if I felt vindicated. Lauren even showed up one night with a bottle of wine labeled Liquid Justice, and we laughed ourselves into hiccups on the balcony. But under all that laughter, there was something else too. Exhaustion. Because revenge, even the quiet, legal, bloodless kind, takes something out of you. And I'd spent months playing the long game. Pretending. Planning. Making sure every step I took wouldn't just hurt him, it would protect me. And now that it was over, I was left sitting in an empty apartment, a successful business on my hands, and a whole lot of repressed emotions that were finally catching up. The first real wave hit me when Luna limped coming down the stairs one morning. It wasn't serious, just a sprain. But I sat on the floor of the vet's office, crying like my heart had just cracked in half. Because in that moment, it wasn't about her leg. It was about the 4 years I'd spent loving someone who turned out to be a stranger. About all the time I'd lost. About all the little humiliations I'd swallowed just to keep the peace. About watching him walk away without even looking back. Grief doesn't care how justified your anger was. It just shows up, sits beside you, and waits until you're ready to feel it. Work helped. Posh was growing like wildfire. Our rhinestone collection sold out in 3 days. We had our first TikTok hit, a bulldog in a glitter leash with disco music playing in the background, and orders tripled overnight. I started doing interviews, podcasts, guest blogs. People loved the brand. But more than that, they loved me. Not in a shallow, fame-chasing way, but in this deeply humbling, I see what you built way. I started getting DMs from women who said they'd started their own businesses because of me. Messages from strangers who wrote, "Your story made me leave my cheating ex." Thank you. It felt strange. Empowering. But strange. Because behind the scenes, I was still waking up at 3 a.m. sometimes, shaking from dreams where Mark was screaming at me again, calling me manipulative, cold, the real villain. Trauma doesn't care how right you were. It clings quietly. I started therapy that fall. It was one of the best decisions I ever made. Not because I needed someone to tell me I was right, I already knew that. But because I needed help untangling the parts of myself that had allowed someone like Mark to get so deep into my life in the first place. And slowly, things started to make sense. How I'd been raised to avoid conflict. To be the bigger person. How I'd learned to overfunction, take care of others so I wouldn't have to look at my own unmet needs. How I'd convinced myself that patience and silence were the same thing as strength. They're not. Sometimes strength is leaving. Sometimes it's speaking up. And sometimes it's sending a cease and desist letter to the man who used your money to take another woman on vacation. Funny how life teaches you things. The first time I saw Mark again, it was almost a year later. I was at a small business expo in Dallas, giving a talk on scaling without selling out. We just launched a vegan line of leashes and collars, and our booth had a line around the block. I was running on adrenaline and cold brew, shaking hands and signing dog bandanas like some kind of indie pet wear celebrity. And then I saw him. He was standing at the edge of the crowd. No badge. No business cards. Just jeans, a wrinkled polo, and that same forced smile I used to mistake for charm. For a second, my stomach flipped. Old habits, I guess. But then I remembered who I was now. I walked right up to him. He didn't speak at first. Just looked at me with that mix of resentment and regret you only see in men who ruin their own lives and still want someone else to blame. Finally, he said, "You look different." I smiled. Successful women tend to glow. He flinched at that, which gave me more satisfaction than it should have. "What are you even doing here?" I asked. He shrugged, just looking around, thinking of getting back into the game. I raised an eyebrow. With what money? That one landed hard. His jaw tightened. You really think you're better than me now? He asked. No, I said. I've always been better. I just finally stopped hiding it. I turned and walked away before he could respond. Lauren called it a mic drop moment when I told her later. But to me, it wasn't even about the clap back. It was about the quiet power of walking away from someone who used to control your world. That's real closure. 6 months later, Mark filed for bankruptcy. I found out through a Google alert I'd forgotten to turn off. It was sad, really. His credit was shot. His failed new business, some cringeworthy CryptoPet NFT idea, had tanked. The girl he cheated with? Gone. Moved to Miami. Got engaged to a real estate agent. I didn't feel sorry for him. But I didn't feel triumphant either. It just felt like watching the credits roll on a movie you hated relieved it's over, but still mad you wasted your time. Meanwhile, Posh had outgrown my apartment. We moved into a cozy little office space downtown. Hired 3 more staff. Launched a subscription box. I started dating again. Carefully. Slowly. Nothing serious yet. But I'm not afraid anymore. Because the biggest thing I've learned through all of this is that protecting yourself isn't weakness, it's wisdom. I used to think love was about loyalty. About giving someone the benefit of the doubt. About showing up, even when they don't deserve it. Now I think love, real love, starts with yourself. With knowing your worth. With not apologizing for expecting respect. With walking away the first time someone tries to dim your light. And sometimes, if life's feeling especially poetic, it also includes watching that same person lose everything while you build an empire out of the rubble. So yeah, he used my money to date someone else. Now he's bankrupt. And I'm just getting started. Before Mark, I didn't think of myself as someone who could carry rage for long. I thought I was someone who processed, forgave, moved on. I had always believed that people were flawed, that they deserved grace, that the best revenge was a good life. But Mark changed that. There was something about being deceived in such a calculated, intimate way, having my love used as capital, my trust turned into funding for his double life, that didn't just sting. It burrowed. It built a home inside me. And even after I'd watched him fall apart from afar, after his bankruptcy and public humiliation, there was still something unresolved inside me. The world moved on, though. And so did I, at least externally. Posh was becoming something much bigger than I'd envisioned. We were approached by a boutique investor group that wanted to expand the brand into European markets. For the first time, I was sitting across from people in actual boardrooms who asked me serious questions about logistics, scale, and global branding. Not a single person asked if I had a co-founder. Not a single person mentioned Mark. I found a strange comfort in that silence, like the world had finally caught up with the truth I'd always known. I was the real builder. The real visionary. Mark was just a side note in a story he tried to steal. But healing isn't linear. There were nights I'd lie in bed, scrolling through old emails, reading contracts he'd signed without looking. Sometimes I'd open our old shared folder and find half-written bios he drafted about us being a power couple in the pet space. It was so ridiculous now, but back then I'd almost believed it. One evening, while preparing for a product launch, I got a message on Instagram from an unfamiliar account. The profile picture was blank, the username a string of letters and numbers. The message simply said, "Thought you should know he's telling people he made Posh. Claims you stole it while he was recovering from mental health issues." I stared at the screen for a long time. My first instinct was to block and ignore. But a different part of me, the part that had rebuilt my self-worth from the ashes he left, told me to dig. I screenshotted the message. Then I followed the account and scrolled back. The user had posted a few cryptic stories, blurry photos from what looked like pop-up events, a couple of comments about fake founders and credit stealers. Nothing directly identifiable, but the tone was unmistakably Mark's. It reeked of desperation disguised as moral outrage. So I did something I hadn't done in over a year. I called Lauren. "Guess who's back?" I said. She didn't even hesitate. "I'll bring wine." When she arrived, we combed through the internet together. Within an hour, we found 3 different forums where Mark had been commenting under fake names, spinning this pathetic narrative about being robbed of his idea. He claimed he was the original founder of Posh, that his ex-girlfriend had manipulated legal documents, and that he was planning to file a lawsuit. On one forum, he even posted a blurry photo of us together from years ago with the caption, "The thief and the face she hides behind." It would have been laughable if it hadn't been so calculated. Lauren looked at me. "You want to go public?" I shook my head. That's what he wants. Attention. A war. So what's the move? I stared at the screen, heart steady. The move is documentation. Over the next few days, I compiled everything. Every contract. Every timestamped login to our store backend. Every bank record. I contacted my lawyer again and had him draft a letter preemptively addressing any false claims. I wanted to be ready. I wasn't going to let him rewrite history, not even in anonymous comment sections. And then, 1 week later, it escalated. I got an email from a small blog that covered female entrepreneurs. They were planning to do a feature on me and Posh. But before they ran the story, they said they had received an anonymous tip that I had stolen the company from a former partner struggling with addiction and mental illness. The editor asked if I wanted to comment. My jaw clenched so tight I thought I might crack a tooth. I took a deep breath, then wrote the most professional, unflinching response of my life. I included attachments, legal documents, timelines, a statement from my lawyer. I thanked them for giving me the chance to clarify. Then I waited. 2 days later, the article went live. It was beautiful, honest, empowering. They didn't mention the tip at all. Instead, they told my story, the real one, about a woman who built something meaningful after betrayal. About resilience, growth, and knowing your worth. The article went viral. And suddenly, Mark's Little Whisper campaign collapsed. The anonymous comments stopped. The fake accounts were deleted. Someone on one of the forums replied to his posts with a link to the article and the comment, "Guess your ex is doing just fine." Lauren and I celebrated by going to the most expensive rooftop bar in the city and ordering cocktails with gold flakes in them. I wore a dress Mark once said made me look too bossy. I looked like a damn queen. Around that time, something unexpected happened. I got an email from his mother. We hadn't spoken in over 2 years. During my relationship with Mark, she'd been distant, polite, but never warm. Now, her message was filled with regret. She said she'd believed his version of the story, that I'd taken advantage of him during a breakdown, that I'd iced him out of his own business. But after the article, she started asking questions. And the answers unraveled fast. Apparently, Mark had borrowed money from her, a lot of it, claiming it was to pay lawyers for a lawsuit against me. When she confronted him, he broke down, admitted it was all a lie. She apologized. Sincerely. I didn't know what to say. So I just told her I hoped he got the help he needed. And I meant it. Not for him, for everyone else he might hurt if he didn't get better. Months passed. The business kept growing. We started selling in boutiques. Got a feature in a national magazine. One of our callers ended up in a celebrity's Instagram story and sold out in an hour. And I finally felt free. Not because I'd won, but because I no longer felt the weight of proving anything. Mark's story had crumbled under its own contradictions. The people who mattered knew the truth. And the ones who didn't? I stopped caring. But the moment I knew I had truly healed came quietly, in the middle of a normal Tuesday. I was at the office, reviewing new prototypes. One of my junior designers came in, a sweet, shy girl named Maya, and told me she was starting her own side project. She looked nervous, like she expected me to shut her down. Instead, I asked her to pitch it to me. She did. And it was good. When she finished, she asked, "How did you do it? Build something this big from scratch?" I thought about lying. About giving her the usual answer, hard work, late nights, vision. But instead, I said, I started by surviving someone who tried to convince me I couldn't. She looked surprised. And then she smiled. "You're kind of a badass," she said. I laughed. I've been called worse. That night, I walked home alone. The city lights shimmered on the wet pavement. Luna trotted beside me, tail wagging. I thought about everything I'd lost. Then I thought about everything I'd built. And for the first time in a long, long time, I felt whole. The thing about rebuilding your life is that no one ever tells you how strange the success will feel. They cheer you on when you escape the mess, when you leave the relationship, when you start over. They throw words like strong and independent at you like confetti, assuming those things make you invincible. But when the dust settles and everything starts working out, the questions come louder than before. Not from others, from yourself. It had been over a year since the last time I heard Mark's name spoken aloud in a room I was in. At Posh, we were entering our second full year with profit margins that made our accountant grin like a lottery winner. Our newest harness designs had caught the attention of a major retail chain. They weren't just interested in carrying our product. They wanted to co-brand with us. We were having meetings I couldn't have even dreamed of 2 years ago, back when I was still naively splitting a Gmail account with the man who'd been draining me dry behind my back. I was living alone again, in a bigger apartment now, with windows that actually caught the sun and a kitchen I had no idea how to use fully. Luna had her own bed in nearly every room and a coat collection that rivaled my own. I had structure again. I had rituals, coffee from the same place each morning, meetings that I actually enjoyed, long walks after dinner where I could think without spiraling. But with all that stability came an emptiness I hadn't anticipated. It wasn't depression. Not quite. It was more like a quiet, persistent itch beneath the surface, the kind you get when you know you're safe, but you haven't quite figured out who you are without the constant adrenaline of survival. One morning, I was cleaning out old boxes from my closet, part of a spring cleaning ritual I had forced myself into, and I found the old shared planner Mark and I used to keep. It was physical, a leather-bound thing we thought made us look more professional when we were meeting vendors. I should have thrown it out instantly, but instead, I sat on the floor and flipped through it. It was bizarre. Each page was a window into our past charade. He'd written notes in blue pen about shipping costs and meeting times, always surrounded by doodles, arrows, underlines, little stars, as if he wanted everything to look more important than it was. I noticed how often he had scratched things out, how inconsistent his commitments were. There were pages where I had written clear, practical goals, and then his messy scribbles all around them like graffiti on a blueprint. On one page, dated about 3 months before we broke up, he'd drawn a big heart and written Mexico in it. I stared at that for longer than I care to admit. That was the same week he'd told me he needed to travel for a brand retreat and ended up posting beach selfies with her. I remember that week vividly. I'd worked 14-hour days prepping for a local pet expo while worrying if he was okay. My hands shook as I closed the book. Not from sadness, but from disgust at him, at myself for tolerating so much, at the way memory has a cruel habit of glossing over pain until you're face to face with proof. I stood up, walked it to the trash chute, and dropped it in without ceremony. Later that day, I called my therapist and booked 2 extra sessions. There was still healing to do, clearly. As life continued, so did the growth. We finalized the retail deal. Posh was about to go national. I started traveling again, but this time it wasn't for damage control or vendor disasters. It was for speaking engagements. Somehow, I had become a voice for women in business. I'd speak at women's leadership panels, and more than once someone would ask the dreaded question, "What was the turning point for you?" Depending on the room, I'd answer differently. Sometimes I'd talk about the betrayal. Other times, I'd pivot to the passion for animals. But the truth, the real turning point, was much smaller. It was a Tuesday morning, a cheap planner, and a single word, Mexico. It still made my skin crawl. One of my favorite panels I spoke at was hosted by a nonprofit that helped fund women escaping abusive relationships. The organizer, a sharp and funny woman named Priya, pulled me aside afterward and said, "You know, your story is kind of everyone's dream. Not the heartbreak, the comeback." I smiled, trying not to shrink under the compliment. "Sometimes I still feel like I'm faking it." She laughed. "That just means you're doing it right." After that event, I started getting emails from women who had seen the talk online. Their stories were different but familiar: betrayal, manipulation, gaslighting, financial control. I began responding personally when I could. It wasn't about giving advice. It was about bearing witness. Saying, I believe you, and meaning it. Somewhere along the line, I realized my business had become more than just dog accessories. It was a symbol of resilience, of survival, of rebirth. Around that time, Lauren, ever the curious friend, texted me a link to a blog post titled, Confessions of a Startup Fraud. It was anonymous, but clearly written by someone spiraling. The post talked about failure, lies, burning bridges, and the loneliness of watching everyone you ever loved turn their back. It was Mark. I knew it instantly. I didn't respond to her message. Didn't share it. Didn't click on the author's profile. I just stared at the screen, blinked twice, and then deleted the text. He was still out there, still searching for a version of the story where he wasn't the villain. But I was done being a character in his narrative. A few weeks later, I met someone. His name was Jordan. He worked in sustainability consulting and had a calmness I found disarming. We met through mutual friends, both of us dragged to a dinner party we didn't want to attend, both expecting to leave early. Instead, we ended up talking until 2 a.m. on the host's balcony, nursing lukewarm tea and swapping stories about the dumbest things we'd done in our 20s. I didn't tell him everything right away. I didn't want this new connection to be painted by the shadows of the past. But when I did tell him about Mark, about the money, about the company, he didn't flinch. He listened, asked thoughtful questions. And then he said something that caught me completely off guard. You don't talk like someone who's bitter. You talk like someone who rebuilt her soul. I'd never cried on a second date before, but that night I did. We didn't rush. We didn't define anything too quickly. But Jordan showed up in ways that Mark never had. He remembered small things, asked how meetings went, brought Luna treats before he brought me flowers. He never made me feel small, even when I struggled to feel fully present. He gave me space, and he earned my trust slowly. The more I let him in, the more I realized how little I'd actually received in my past relationship. How much I'd settled. How low the bar had been. Not just with Mark, but with myself. Jordan didn't complete me. That's not what this is. He reminded me that I'd already completed myself. And that was enough. Now, as I look ahead, everything feels different. Not perfect. Not wrapped in a bow. But real. And solid. I have people I trust. A business I love. A sense of peace that isn't performative. Sometimes, I still get emails from women asking how to spot the red flags sooner. I tell them this. If someone uses your dreams as leverage, run. If they mock your ambition, run faster. And if you ever find yourself asking if you're the problem, take a breath, take a step back, and ask yourself this. Would I ever treat someone the way they treat me? The answer will tell you everything. Because that's what I learned. He used my money to date someone else. But I used that betrayal to become the strongest version of myself. And no one can take that away. Not even him. The first time I saw Mark again was a complete accident. I hadn't been looking for him, hadn't thought of him in weeks, maybe months. My world had grown too big for his ghost to follow. But it's strange how the past finds ways to claw at the present when you least expect it. I had just wrapped a morning meeting in Midtown and was walking toward my usual coffee spot, a little boutique cafe tucked between a florist and a bookstore. It was one of those crisp fall mornings, the kind that make the city feel like a movie set. I had just sent a message to my assistant about the sample delay when I looked up, and there he was. Mark. Standing across the street, hunched slightly forward, wearing a suit that looked one size too large and 10 years too old. He was talking to someone, a man in his 50s maybe, gesturing toward a building I didn't recognize. He didn't see me. Not right away. I froze, not out of fear, but out of surprise. I hadn't rehearsed this moment. In all my thoughts about closure and growth, I'd never actually imagined seeing his face again in real life. Not now. Not like this. He looked tired. Not sick, not completely broken, but weathered. The kind of tired that clings to a person who's burned too many bridges to find a way back. His hair was thinner, his posture lazier, his face held none of that smug arrogance that once kept me up at night. It was just Mark. Smaller somehow. Fading. I could have turned around. Could have crossed the street, ducked into the florist, pretended I didn't see him. But I didn't. I stood still. And then his eyes caught mine. There was a flicker of recognition. His mouth parted, as if he might say something. But I didn't give him the chance. I tilted my head slightly. No smile. No wave. Just a small nod. And then I walked past. My heart wasn't racing. My hands didn't shake. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I was done. Later that evening, I told Lauren about it over dinner. She dropped her fork in dramatic shock and immediately started asking questions. Did he try to follow you? Did he speak? Did you spit in his face? I laughed, sipping my wine. No. I nodded. Then I walked away. She leaned back in her chair and grinned. Cold-blooded. I love it. But it wasn't about being cold. It was about peace. About the difference between revenge and resolution. I didn't need him to suffer in front of me to know I'd won. I just needed to keep moving. Still, that encounter rattled something loose. That night, after Luna was asleep in her bed and the apartment was quiet, I found myself on my laptop searching. Not for Mark, but for the girl he left me for. She'd mostly vanished from the internet after things ended between them, or at least after his bankruptcy. But now her name popped up again, linked to a small candle shop she'd started 2 towns away. The irony wasn't lost on me. She'd left me for someone who promised her a big future, and now she was hand-pouring soy wax into mason jars. I didn't feel smug. Just tired. I closed the tab. Not my circus. Not my clowns. That week, we hit another milestone at Posh, our 100,000th order. I celebrated with the team by renting out a dog-friendly brewery and surprising everyone with a catered dinner and live music. We laughed, toasted, danced. No one mentioned our beginnings. No one mentioned Mark. It was like he had never existed. And maybe, in a way, he hadn't. Not in this version of my life. Not in the chapters one wrote after he stopped being the author of my story. One of our newer employees, Mia, came up to me toward the end of the night. She was young, fresh out of college, bursting with ideas. She told me how inspired she was by what I'd built. "You're like the blueprint," she said. "Like, you lived through hell and still made it look effortless." I smiled, humbled and uncomfortable at once. "It wasn't effortless," I said honestly. "But it was worth it." She nodded. "Do you ever think you had to go through that? All of that, just to get here?" I paused. It was a question I'd asked myself many times. Would I have had the same fire, the same clarity if I hadn't been betrayed? Would Posh exist if I hadn't been forced to rebuild from nothing? I didn't know. Maybe I said. But I'd trade the pain for peace any day. After that night, I decided to do something I'd avoided for a long time. I went back to the very first version of our website. I had saved everything, old drafts, screenshots, even the pitch decks Mark and I had created together. Not to dwell. Not to cry. But to see how far I'd come. It was wild. The old branding was clumsy, the copy awkward, the photos overexposed. But the heart was there. I could see it even then, my fingerprints, my vision. I had always been the soul of the company. He was just noise. I took screenshots of the old pages and printed them. Then I framed them and hung them in our office hallway with a small plaque beneath, where we started. My team loved it. Clients commented on it constantly. But for me, it wasn't about nostalgia. It was about ownership. About reclaiming the narrative. A few days later, I got an email. No subject. No signature. Just one line. "I saw you the other day. You look happy." "I'm glad." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Some silences are louder than words. That weekend, I joined Jordan and his friends on a weekend retreat upstate. It was the first time I'd been around a group of people who knew me only as the version I'd become, not the one who had to claw her way back from betrayal. They asked about the business, about Luna, about my favorite cities to visit. No one asked me about Mark. No one asked me about heartbreak. And when the topic of exes came up over dinner, I simply said, I learned a lot from my past relationship. Mostly about what I won't tolerate again. That was all. That was enough. On our last night there, Jordan pulled me aside while the others were by the fire. "You're incredible," he said, almost shyly. "Not just for what you built. For how you carry it." I smiled. It took a long time to feel that way. He touched my hand. Whatever it took, I'm grateful. Because I get to know you now. That night, as we fell asleep under unfamiliar stars, I realized something. Mark had once been my world. But now he was just a footnote in a much longer story, one filled with light and growth and joy. And I wasn't done writing. Not even close. By the time the third year of Posh rolled around, we were no longer a startup clawing our way through trade shows and DIY marketing. We had a full team, loyal customers, and even a couple of competitors who had tried to imitate our aesthetic, a strangely flattering sign of growth. I was working smarter, not harder. And I had finally started to sleep through the night again, not haunted by unpaid bills or betrayal flashbacks. It was in that calm rhythm that something unexpected happened, something I hadn't even dared to imagine in the early days of recovery. I got a letter. A physical one. It was tucked between a package and an ad flyer in my mailbox, handwritten, addressed to me with no return address. The handwriting was familiar, though shakier than I remembered. I stood in my kitchen staring at the envelope for a solid minute, my fingers tingling with 1,000 guesses. I knew. Even before I opened it, I knew. It was from Mark. I had deleted his number years ago, blocked his email, cleared his presence from my digital life completely. But this was different. Paper. Pen. His actual effort. I opened it. It wasn't long. Just a page, written in uneven black ink. He said he wasn't writing to ask for anything. Not forgiveness, not money. He admitted clearly, finally, that what he did to me was inexcusable. That he'd spent the last few years trying to build something of his own but had failed in every way that mattered. He said the business he started after me had gone under. The woman he left me for had left him. His family barely spoke to him. He was, in his own words, waking up in the mess I made and realizing I set fire to the only good thing I ever had. At the end of the letter, he thanked me. Thanked me for the early days, for the foundation I built, for the fact that I hadn't destroyed him in public when I easily could have. You had every reason to ruin me, he wrote. But you let me do it myself. I folded the letter carefully and put it in a drawer. Not because I wanted to keep it, but because I didn't want to be impulsive. Old me might have lit it on fire or sent it back torn in half. New me didn't need a performance. I didn't tell Jordan about it immediately. Not because I was hiding something, but because I wanted to sit with it on my own for a while. This wasn't closure. I'd already made peace long ago, but it was a kind of punctuation. An ending sentence to a chapter one hadn't fully realized was still open. A few days later, while walking Luna through the park, I finally told him. We sat on a bench, drinking coffee, the late afternoon sun spilling through the trees. I pulled out the letter, handed it to him, and waited. He read it slowly, his eyes scanning each word, his jaw tightening just slightly at the middle paragraph. When he finished, he folded it back up and looked at me. "How do you feel?" he asked. I was quiet for a moment. Sad, I think. But not for me. For him. He nodded. That makes sense. Then he handed it back and said, "Whatever you decide to do with it, it's your call. You don't owe him anything." That night, I shredded the letter. I didn't need it. I didn't need a physical reminder of who I used to be. I didn't want a relic of someone else's guilt taking up space in my drawer or in my mind. I was free. Life continued, fuller than ever. Posh was expanding into international markets. We'd partnered with a dog rescue organization to donate a percentage of our profits. Jordan and I had started looking at homes together, not because we were rushing anything, but because building something together felt like the natural next step. One evening, at a charity gala, I ran into someone I hadn't seen in years, Lauren's ex-boyfriend, Eric. He'd always had a strange admiration for Mark, back when we were all still orbiting the same social circles. He came up to me with a slightly awkward smile. "Hey," he said. "Didn't think I'd see you here." I nodded politely. "How's everything?" He gave a half shrug. "Good. Busy. I saw your company on TV last week. You're everywhere now." I smiled. "We're growing. It's been a wild ride." He hesitated, then leaned in slightly. "You ever talk to Mark anymore?" I raised an eyebrow. "No." "Why?" Eric looked uncomfortable. "He's not doing great. I ran into him last month. He was working at some warehouse. Said he'd tried reaching out. He did, I said. I got a letter. Eric looked like he wanted to ask more, but he stopped himself. Anyway, he said quickly, just wanted to say congrats. You deserve it. I thanked him and walked away. It hit me later that night, how surreal it all was. That once upon a time, I had shared my passwords, my dreams, my heart with someone who had used it all against me. And now, years later, he was sorting boxes in a warehouse while I gave keynotes at business conferences. It wasn't just about revenge. It wasn't even about justice. It was about truth. About how the person you think you can't live without becomes the person you're so grateful you left behind. There was a peace in that. A quiet, grounded kind of peace. Not a victory lap. Just stillness. One morning, I received a package at the office. No name, no note. Inside was a framed photo of the very first posh product, the ugly, clunky prototype leash we'd made together in our kitchen. For a second, I thought it might be a prank. But the handwriting on the package label was unmistakably his. It wasn't malicious. It wasn't creepy. It felt like an acknowledgement. A passing of the torch. A silent, final bow. I kept the photo for a week. Let it sit on my desk, watched how it made me feel. Then I donated it to a local women's center that was building a display on female entrepreneurship. I told them it was a symbol of starting before you're ready. Of not waiting for perfect. They hung it proudly. A week later, I never thought about it again. Months passed. Jordan and I bought a small home just outside the city, with a yard for Luna, and a sunroom that quickly became my favorite place to work. We hosted dinners, planted a garden, started talking about the kind of future that used to feel like fantasy. I even began mentoring young female founders, helping them avoid the mistakes I'd made, teaching them how to spot the red flags early. And then one day, while organizing old files for a book I'd been asked to write, I found a sticky note buried at the bottom of a folder. It was my handwriting, scrawled years ago. It said, "You'll survive this. And one day, you'll be so far beyond it that you won't recognize the woman who wrote this." I smiled. Because she was right. I didn't recognize her. But I honored her. Every day. There's a strange calm that comes when the chaos finally stops knocking. It had been over a year since Mark's letter. Since the final package. Since I donated that prototype photo to the Women's Center and walked away without a second thought. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't even feel nostalgic. Just still. Jordan and I had just moved into our new home, a warm, sun-soaked house nestled on the edge of the city. It wasn't flashy, but it was ours. We painted the walls together, argued lovingly over rugs and curtains, and gave Luna her own little nook by the window. Every inch of it felt like peace carved from war. And yet, some mornings, I still found myself pausing mid-coffee, staring out into the quiet street, waiting for the other shoe to drop. That's the thing no one tells you about healing. It doesn't always come with closure. Sometimes it comes with silence. With questions you'll never get answered, and wounds that scar rather than fade. But you learn to live around the scars. You even begin to grow through them. Posh was thriving. We launched a limited edition heritage line, inspired by our early designs, minus the chaos. It sold out in under 24 hours. Not because it was the most innovative thing we'd ever made, but because it was honest. Raw. People resonated with that. We were starting to mean something more than just rhinestone collars and velvet leashes. We were a symbol. For women who rebuilt. For women who'd been doubted, undermined, used, and underestimated, and still rose. We started getting letters. Handwritten ones. From teenage girls who'd been told they were too much. From single moms trying to build Etsy empires in between daycare runs. From survivors. So many survivors. One of them, a woman named Danny, sent me a photo of her holding her rescue dog while wearing our collar with a caption that read, "He said I'd never amount to anything without him. Now we go on walks and plan world domination." I cried. Ugly cried. Right there at my desk. Because it was never just about Mark. It was about every woman who gave more than she got, who stayed too long, who believed in someone who chipped away at her piece by piece. And about what happens when she finally stops shrinking and starts expanding instead. But life wasn't all headlines and product launches. There were still shadows. One afternoon, while clearing out old files, I stumbled across a forgotten email folder, an archive from the early Posh days. I didn't even remember creating it. Inside were dozens of drafts, apology emails I never sent, arguments I tried to script before confronting Mark, notes to myself filled with doubt. One line hit me hardest. Maybe I'm the problem. Maybe I'm asking for too much. I stared at it for a long time. That version of me felt like a different person now, but I remembered her clearly. I remembered the way her stomach clenched when he sighed through his teeth. The way she practiced how to bring up finances without nagging. The way she braced every time he picked up his phone during dinner. I wanted to hug her. Tell her she wasn't too much. She was just enough for the wrong person. I deleted the folder. Some ghosts don't need to be exorcised. Just acknowledged. And then let go. Around that time, I was invited to give a keynote at a National Women's Entrepreneurship Conference. I almost said no. I didn't want to be the revenge girl forever, the woman who got screwed over and built an empire from spite. But the organizer, a woman named Priya I had met before, was persistent. She said, "You're not just a founder. You're a lighthouse." I didn't fully understand what she meant until the day of the event. I stood on that stage, looking out at hundreds of faces, some young and terrified, others older and quietly burning with recognition. And for the first time, I didn't tell the story from a place of pain. I told it from a place of power. I spoke about the business, yes, the logistics, the growth, the challenges. But I also spoke about what happens when you bet on yourself after someone bets against you. About how hard it is to reclaim your voice after someone teaches you to whisper. About the quiet violence of being doubted again and again. And about how healing isn't a straight line. Sometimes, it's a spiral. They gave me a standing ovation. But the best moment came afterward, in the hallway. A girl no older than 20 came up to me, tears streaming down her cheeks. She didn't say much. Just held my hand and whispered, "Thank you. You made me feel like I'm not crazy." And that was everything. A month later, I got a call from a publisher. They wanted a book. Not just about Posh, about everything. The fall, the betrayal, the rebuild, the quiet rise. I laughed when I hung up. Not because I wasn't flattered, but because the idea that my story, my mess, my blood and grit and spit-shine scars could sit on a shelf next to glossy memoirs by billionaires was surreal. But I said yes. Because why not? Why not let the truth live in ink instead of memory? Why not give that scared girl inside me the final word? I didn't tell Mark, obviously. But I wondered if he'd hear about it. If someone would send him a link. If he'd see the title one day, maybe in a bookstore, maybe online, and flinch. And if he did, that would be enough. Because I wasn't writing it for revenge. I was writing it for every woman who's ever been told, "You're lucky to have me," by someone who didn't deserve her in the first place. Later that summer, Jordan and I hosted a dinner party. Just friends, nothing fancy, mismatched plates, wine that cost less than $15, Luna happily begging under the table like the spoiled princess she was. At one point, we all started sharing the moment that changed everything in our lives. When it was my turn, I thought about saying Mark. But instead, I said, the moment I realized I didn't need to explain myself anymore. That being good to someone didn't mean tolerating being broken by them. There was a quiet around the table. Then Maya, who had come with her new girlfriend, raised her glass and said, "To becoming the person you needed when you were scared." We all toasted. And for the first time in my adult life, I didn't feel like I was surviving anymore. I was living. The last time I heard about Mark was from a mutual acquaintance, someone I barely remembered from the early Posh brainstorming sessions. They said he was working part-time at a warehouse still, living in a studio apartment across town, and keeping a low profile. He wasn't dating, wasn't creating, wasn't building anything, just existing. And for the first time, I felt nothing at all. No rage, no pity, just quiet. Because in the end, that's the real revenge. Not success, not applause, not even forgiveness. It's indifference. It's when their name becomes a passing cloud in a sky you no longer check for storms. It's when you build something beautiful, not despite them, but beyond them. And you never look back. It was a Thursday when the email came through. Subject line: podcast opportunity. Your story deserves a mic. I almost deleted it. Spam, probably. I'd been getting more of those lately, people wanting me to collab, to leverage my narrative, to build synergistic personal brand equity. Barf. But something about this one felt different. The sender was a producer from a well-known storytelling podcast. They didn't want to talk about products or profits. They wanted to talk about survival, about rebuilding, about women who refused to stay broken. I sat with it for an hour. Then I said yes. Recording day came fast. The studio was tucked into a quiet corner of the city, warm lighting and soft couches and tea that smelled like lemon and safety. The host, a soft-voiced woman named Jamie, greeted me with that look. The one I'd come to recognize. Half admiration, half awe. We sat down. She adjusted the mic. Asked if I was ready. I nodded. And for the first time ever, I told the whole story, start to finish. Not just the business. Not just Mark. Everything. The confusion. The nights I stared at the ceiling wondering if I was crazy. The gaslighting. The quiet grief. The way Luna would curl against me when she sensed I was coming undone. The way I kept showing up, even when my heart was nothing but smoke and embers. I told her about the day I let him sign his own downfall. About the email from the investor. The contracts. The calm confrontation. His tantrum. My stillness. I told her how it felt to win. And how empty that win was until I started building something for myself. For real. Jamie didn't interrupt. Didn't even blink. When I finished, she reached across the table and touched my hand. You didn't just survive, she said. You rewrote the ending. I smiled. I think I burned the old one, I said. The episode dropped 2 weeks later. I didn't promote it. Didn't need to. It exploded on its own. Within 24 hours, my inbox was flooded. Messages from women across the country, hell, across the world, telling me they saw themselves in my voice. Telling me they'd left partners, quit jobs, filed paperwork, blocked numbers. Telling me they'd stopped apologizing for wanting more. It was overwhelming. Beautiful. Humbling. And then, in the middle of it all, a message from an unfamiliar name. I think you saved my daughter. Attached was a screenshot, a text exchange between a mom and her daughter, the girl admitting she'd been scared to leave her boyfriend, but finally found the courage after listening to my story. I cried. Hard. Not for myself. For her. Because I knew what that fear tasted like. And I knew how powerful it was to finally spit it out. Around that time, Jordan asked if I wanted to take a trip. No agenda. No business conference. Just us. We went to Portugal. A quiet coastal town, pastel buildings, orange trees heavy with fruit. We hiked, we swam, we read under the sun. Luna made friends with every street cat in sight. One evening, as we sat on a rooftop watching the sun melt into the Atlantic, Jordan turned to me and asked, "Do you ever miss the chaos?" I shook my head instantly, then paused. No, I said. But sometimes I miss who I had to become to survive it. He nodded, understanding more than most would. That version of you got you here, he said. But you don't have to keep carrying her. I exhaled so deeply I felt my ribs shift. Maybe it was time to finally put her down. We got engaged that fall. No big speech. No Instagram announcement. Just two people who had seen each other's darkness and decided to stay anyway. I didn't need a ring to feel chosen. But I wore it proudly. Because this time I chose right. In early spring, I got an invitation to return to the women's shelter I'd once donated the photo to. They were unveiling a new wing funded by local donors, featuring stories of women who'd rebuilt after financial abuse. They asked if I'd speak. I didn't hesitate. The room was small, raw, folding chairs and flickering lights. But the energy was electric. There were no suits, no glam, just survivors. Brave, messy, brilliant women still sewing themselves back together. I stood in front of them and said this. You don't owe anyone your silence. You don't have to be polite about your pain. And you sure as hell don't have to stay broken just because someone else refused to love you whole. The applause was soft, but real. Afterwards, one woman hugged me so hard I felt my spine crack. She whispered, "He took everything." But I'm still here. I nodded. That's enough. For now. Months passed. Posh crossed its millionth order. Jordan and I adopted another dog, a goofy senior, mutt with one ear and zero shame. We named her Whiskey. Luna wasn't thrilled, but she adapted. I started writing more, not just interviews or blurbs, but essays. Fiction. Even poetry sometimes. It felt indulgent. Free. One night, I sat alone in the sunroom, rereading the early chapters of the book draft. It felt distant now, like reading someone else's life. The pain was still there, but it didn't sting. It shimmered, like gold in the cracks. I closed my laptop and looked out the window. I didn't see ghosts. I didn't feel hollow. I just saw a future I'd carved from rubble, lined with soft light and steady hands. And then, one day, something happened that would have gutted me once. Mark's name trended. Briefly. Quietly. Someone had unearthed his anonymous posts again, a compilation on TikTok, stitched together with screenshots and sarcastic commentary. The caption was something like, "Men will start a war before admitting they fumbled a queen." It had 500,000 views. I watched it once. Then I turned off my phone and walked into the kitchen. Jordan was making dinner. Luna was snoring. Whiskey was trying to steal a carrot. I laughed. And that was it. No spiral. No lingering ache. Just joy. Present. Undeniable. Unshakable. I'll never write Mark's name in my book. He doesn't deserve ink. He had his chapter, and I closed it. But I will write about what came after. About the woman who learned to stop explaining. About the business built from broken trust. About the love that came softly, steadily, and stayed. About the echo of laughter in a home no longer haunted. About the strength born not from rage, but from release. Because in the end, the best revenge wasn't the success. It wasn't the empire. It wasn't even the peace. It was that I didn't need revenge anymore. I just let go. And never looked back.